guys, what's going on? I hope you're all having a great day with Christ, spending it in love and worship and prayer and repentance and Bible reading and coming closer to God through the saints, through almsgiving and all of these great things. I have some good news. Your prayers for Father Tryphon have worked. Not to say that I'm just saying Father Tryphon's surgery was a success, and he's hopefully planning on returning to the monastery today. So thank you guys all so much for your prayers. I'm sure he's very appreciative of them as well. I don't know him on a personal level, but, I thank you, and I'm sure he thanks you greater than I do. Today, as always, I want to show off the playlist. Just type in John Shares the Bible, search it up. If it doesn't come up immediately, and I think it should, just filter to playlists. The reason that I say this is because we watch these longer format videos during these videos to avoid ads. Unfortunately, we still get some ads sometimes, but a lot less than if we just let them play. Unfortunately, that means we don't get to play the individual songs, which are just as good as the songs that play in these longer format videos. So I would love for you guys to hear all of the beautiful music available. Not that this playlist is the entire collection of, good Orthodox chants and music, because of course it's not, probably not even 1%. But I recommend you. I'd love for you to listen. I know you'll love them. So yeah, check it out. And today we are on 1 Maccabees chapters 10, 11, and 12. As always, out of the OSB, the Orthodox Study Bible. And as always, there is a link in the description below to get your very own. I'm not sponsored. I don't make a dime whether you get one or not. I think they're around $30, $35. But I strongly recommend you get one, because it's a beautiful Bible. It's the Bible we should be reading. It's in a beautiful, honored translation. The fullness of the Bible before anyone started taking bits and chapters and verses and psalms and entire books out of it. It's the fullness of the Bible with one-of-a-kind commentary from the saints, from the church fathers, from men much wiser than me. You're going to get infinitely better commentary than I could ever provide to you. So, with that being said, we have 1 Maccabees. Let's see if we can find the page we're on. Let's try 1475. First, kind of close. 1 Maccabees 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to take a quick sip of my drink here, and then we're going to get right into it. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Alexander appoints Jonathan high priest. Then in the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, went forth and conquered Ptolemais. They made him welcome, and he reigned there. But when Demetrius the king learned of this, he gathered a huge army and went out to battle him. Demetrius also sent a letter to Jonathan with peaceful words to flatter him. For he said, "Let us act with foresight and make peace with him before he sides with Alexander against us. For he will recall the evils we carried out against him and against his brothers and his nation." So the kings gave authority to Jonathan to assemble an army, prepare weapons, and be his ally. He also ordered the hostages in the citadel to be released to him. Then Jonathan entered Jerusalem and read the letter in the presence of all the people and those in the citadel. They were very frightened when they heard the king had given Jonathan authorization to assemble an army. So the men in the citadel returned the hostages to Jonathan, and he brought them back to their parents. Soon Jonathan settled in Jerusalem and began to reconstruct the city. He also told the workers to build the walls to surround Mount Zion, with square-cut stones for fortification, which they did. Then the foreigners who had been in their fortresses built by Maccabees fled. Each one left his place and departed into his own land. Only some in Beth Zur who had forsaken the law, the commanders remained, only some in Beth Zur who had forsaken the law, and the commanders remained, for it was a place of refuge. When King Alexander heard about the proposals Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, and was told about the battles and the courageous deeds done by Jonathan and his brothers, as well as what they had suffered, he said, "Where will we find another like this man? Let us make him our friend and our ally." So he wrote a letter and sent it to him, saying, "Alexander the king to Jonathan his brother, greetings. We have heard you are a mighty warrior and suitable to be our friend. So now we appoint you today as high priest of your people, and command that you be called a friend of the king." He also sent him a purple robe and a golden crown. "We ask you to agree with our interests and maintain friendship with us." So Jonathan in the seventh month, I get a little tongue-tied. So Jonathan in the 7th month of the 160th year put on the holy robe at the Feast of the Tabernacles. Then he gathered an army and stockpiled many weapons. Demetrius the first writes to Jonathan. When Demetrius heard these reports, he was disturbed and said, "What is this that we have done? Alexander has upstaged us by forming a friendship with the Jews for support. I also will write them words of encouragement and promise them glory and gifts, that they may be my support." So he sent them the following message: "King Demetrius, to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since you have kept your agreements with us and maintained our friendship, and have not sided with our enemies, we have learned of this and rejoiced. Even now do continue to keep faith with us, and we will repay you good things for your deeds. We will grant you many prerogatives and give you gifts. At this time I am releasing all exempting all Jews from tribute and salt taxes from crown levies. Furthermore, instead of handing over to me a third of the harvest and half of the fruits of the trees, which I am due, I cancel them from this day forward and beyond. I will not extract them from those of Judah, nor from the 3 provinces annexed to them from Samaria and Galilee from now on. In addition, let Jerusalem and her vicinities be set apart and released from tithes and taxes. I am also releasing my control of the citadel in Jerusalem, and I give it to the high priest, so that he may place men in it whom he himself chooses to guard it. So every soul of the Jews taken captive from the land of Judah into all my kingdom I release freely without payment. Let all officials also cancel the duties on their livestock. Moreover, all the feasts, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed days, as well as the 3 days prior to the feast and 3 after the feast, let all these days be established as exempt and released for the Jews in my kingdom. No one will have the power to exact anything from them or to trouble any of them about anything. Let the number of Jews in the army of the king be limited to 30,000 men, and let the stipend that is due to all the troops of the king be paid to them. Some of them are to be established in the great fortresses of the king, and some are to be set in positions of trust wherever the kingdom has need. Let their officers and leaders be taken from them, and let them live by their own laws, as the king commanded in the land of Judah. As for the 3 provinces added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be considered as one, so it may not be subject to any other authority than the high priest. I have given Ptolemais and the land adjoining it as gifts to the sanctuary in Jerusalem, for regular expenses in the sanctuary. I also grant 15,000 silver shekels yearly out of the king's revenues from the appropriate places. Even all the surplus the officials did not pay as the first years. From now on they will give for the works of the temple. Moreover, the 5,000 shekels of silver which the officials received every year from the incomes of the sanctuary, these are also canceled, because they belong to the priests who minister there. Further, whoever takes refuge at the temple in Jerusalem or in any of its vicinities because he owes a royal payment or any debt, Let him be released and receive back all his property in my kingdom. The expense of rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary is also to be paid from the king's revenue. Then too the expenses of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the fortifications around it are to be paid from the king's revenue, and also the rebuilding of the walls in Judea. Offer rejected, Demetrius killed. But when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs Demetrius had done in Israel, and how badly he had afflicted them. So they favored Alexander, because he was the first to offer peaceable words to them. Therefore they remained allied with him all his days. Now King Alexander assembled a large army and took position opposite Demetrius. The two kings met in battle, and the army of Demetrius fled. Alexander took pursuit and defeated them. He fought very hard until sunset, and Demetrius fell on that day. Alexander weds Cleopatra. Then Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, with the following message: Since I returned to my kingdom and have taken the throne of my fathers and established my rule, for I defeated Demetrius and secured control of my country. I faced him in war, and he and his forces were destroyed by us, and we indeed have sat down upon the throne of his kingdom. Now let us build a friendship with each other. Give me your daughter in marriage, and I will become your son-in-law. I will give you gifts worthy of both you and her. Then Ptolemy the king answered, saying, It was a good day when you went back to your fathers' homeland and occupied the throne of their kingdom. Now I will do for you what you requested. So meet me at Ptolemais, that we might see each other, and I will be your father-in-law, as you asked. Then Ptolemy left Egypt along with his daughter Cleopatra, and reached Ptolemais in the 162nd year. King Alexander met him there, and Ptolemy gave him his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. He celebrated her wedding in Ptolemais with great pageantry in royal manner. Jonathan made governor. Then King Alexander wrote for Jonathan to meet him. So he journeyed with splendor to Ptolemais, and there met with two monarchs. He offered them silver and gold, and gave their friends numerous gifts. Thus he found favor with them. Then some troublemakers from Israel, lawless men, also gathered against Jonathan to accuse him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king then gave command to remove Jonathan's clothes and to robe him in purple, and they did. And the king seated him with himself and said to his leaders, Go out with him into the midst of the city, and proclaim that no one should accuse him concerning any matter, and let no one trouble him for any cause. So it was that when his accusers saw the honor given him according to the proclamation, and saw him robed in purple, they fled. Thus the king honored him and inscribed him among his close friends. He also appointed him general and provincial governor. Then Jonathan departed to Jerusalem with peace and gladness of heart. Demetrius II appoints Apollonius. Now in the 165th year, Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, traveled from Crete to the land of his fathers. When King Alexander heard it, he was very distressed and went back to Antioch. Then Demetrius appointed Apollonius governor of Coele-Syria. Apollonius gathered a large army and marched against Jamnia. He sent word to Jonathan the high priest, saying, You alone rose up against us, but I was ridiculed and disgraced because of you. Why do you maintain authority over us in the hill country? Now therefore, if you trust in your army, come down against us in the plain, and let us judge together for ourselves there. For I have an army of the cities. Inquire and learn who I am, and the others who help us. They tell us there is no place for your foot to stand before us, because your fathers were put to flight twice in their land. Even now you shall not be able to withstand such a cavalry and army in the plain, where there is neither stone nor pebble nor any place to flee. Jonathan defeats Apollonius. But when Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, he was moved to action. He chose 10,000 men and departed from Jerusalem, and his brother Simon joined to help him. He took up a position at Joppa, but the men of that city shut its gates, for Apollonius had a band of soldiers in Joppa. So Jonathan attacked them. Then the men of Joppa became fearful and opened the gates, and Jonathan captured Joppa. When Apollonius got word of it, he gathered 3,000 cavalry and a sizable army and marched into Azotus, as though he were going beyond. But he went ahead into the plain, since he had a large cavalry and trusted in it. Jonathan chased him to Azotus, and there the armies joined in battle. But Apollonius secretly had left 1,000 cavalry behind, and shot. Jonathan discovered there was an ambush behind him, for they encircled his army and shot arrows at his troops from morning till sundown. But his army stood their ground as Jonathan had ordered, and their cavalry grew tired. Then Simon brought in his army and confronted the phalanx in battle, for the cavalry had grown tired, and they were crushed by him and fled. When the cavalry was scattered on the plain, they retreated to Azotus, entering Beth Dagon, their pagan temple, to hide. So Jonathan set Azotus and the surrounding cities on fire and took spoils from them. The temple of Dagon and those who took refuge in it were burned up in the fire. So 8,000 men fell by the sword, along with those who were killed by the fire. Then Jonathan left there and camped opposite Ashkelon, and the men of the city came out with great ceremony to meet him. Jonathan and the men with him later went back to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus, when King Alexander heard these reports, he proceeded to honor Jonathan again. So he sent him a golden buckle, as was customary to give the relatives of kings. He also gave to him Ekron and all its regions as his possession. Chapter 11. Ptolemy IV and Alexander die. Then the king of Egypt gathered together a large army, like sand along the seashore, and many ships. And he sought to obtain possession of Alexander's kingdom by deceit, and to add it to his kingdom. So he set out for Syria with words of peace, and those from the cities were open to him, and met with him, because King Alexander ordered them to meet him, since he was his father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the cities, he set a band of soldiers in every city. But when they neared Azotus, they showed him the temple of Dagon, which had been burned, and Azotus and the surrounding fortifications that were destroyed, and the bodies of those lying about whom Jonathan had burned in the war, for they had made heaps of them in his path. They also told the king what Jonathan had done, so as to blame him, but the king remained silent. Jonathan then met the king in Joppa with great ceremony, and they greeted each other, and stayed in the night there. Jonathan journeyed with the king to the river Eleutherus, and then went back to Jerusalem. Thus King Ptolemy ruled over the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea, and devised evil plans against Alexander. So he sent ambassadors to King Demetrius, saying, "Come, let us enter into a covenant with one another. I will give you my daughter, Alexander's wife, in marriage, and you will reign over your father's kingdom. For I regret giving him my daughter, since he tried to kill me." Thus Ptolemy blamed Alexander because he desired his kingdom. So he took back his daughter and gave her to Demetrius. Therefore he was estranged from Alexander, and their animosity was evident. Then Ptolemy entered Antioch and assumed the crown of Asia. So he wore 2 crowns on his head, that of Egypt and that of Asia. But King Alexander was in Cilicia at this time, for the inhabitants there were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he engaged him in battle. So Ptolemy went out with a mighty force and faced him, putting him to flight. Then Alexander took refuge in Arabia, seeking safety. King Ptolemy was held in great honor. So Zabdiel the Arab cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. But King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his garrisons in the fortresses were destroyed by the inhabitants of those fortresses. Thus, in the 167th year, King Demetrius became king. Jonathan finds favor with Demetrius II. In those days, Jonathan gathered men from Judea to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war for use against it. But some lawless men who despised their nation came to the king and told him Jonathan would set siege to the citadel. When the king heard this, he was enraged, and he broke camp and went to Ptolemais. He wrote Jonathan that he was to lift the siege and to meet him in Ptolemais at once for a conference. But when Jonathan heard this, he issued orders to continue the siege. Then he chose some elders of Israel and some priests and put himself in danger. For he took silver, gold, clothing, and many other friendly gifts and went to the king in Ptolemais. And Jonathan found favor with him. Again, some lawless men from the nation accused Jonathan. But the king did to him as those before him had done, and exalted him in front of all his friends. He also confirmed him in the high priesthood and whatever other honors he held before, and considered him as one of his best friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to exempt Judea from paying taxes with the 3 provinces and Samaria, and promised him 300 talents. The king was pleased and wrote Jonathan a letter concerning all these things. Its message was as follows: King Demetrius to his brother Jonathan and the nation of the Jews, greetings. The copy of this letter which we wrote to Lasthenes, our relative, concerning you, we have copied also to you, that you might know what it says. King Demetrius to his father Lasthenes, greetings. To the nation of the Jews, our friends, and who do what is right towards us, we have decided to do good because of their goodwill toward us. We have established the borders of Judea for them, and the 3 provinces of Ephraim, Lida, and Rathaman. They were added to Judea from Samaria, as well as all the areas bordering them. All who offer sacrifices in Jerusalem we have released from the royal taxes, which the king receives from them each year, from the harvest of the earth and fruit of the trees. Any other payments due us from now on from the tithes, the salt pits, and the crown taxes. From all these we grant release. None of these provisions will be canceled from now on for all time. Now therefore take heed to make a copy of this, and let it be given to Jonathan, and put in a notable place on the holy mountain. Jonathan aids Demetrius II. When King Demetrius saw the land was peaceful before him, and no one was opposed to him, he dismissed his troops, each to their own place, except the foreign soldiers whom he had recruited as mercenaries from the islands of the nations. So all the soldiers who had served his fathers hated him. Now Tryphon formerly had been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the soldiers complained against Demetrius. So he approached Imilcu, the Arab, who was rearing Antiochus, the young son of Alexander. He insisted that he hand Antiochus over to him, so as to make him king in place of his father. He told Imilcu everything Demetrius has done, and the hatred his troops had for him, and he remained there many days. Meanwhile, Jonathan sent to King Demetrius the request that he remove the soldiers in the citadel from Jerusalem, as well as those in the fortresses, for they were at war with Israel. Then Demetrius sent to Jonathan, "Not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will greatly honor you and the Jewish nation when I have the opportunity. And you will do rightly to send me soldiers who will ally with me, because all my troops have revolted." So Jonathan sent 3,000 very able men to him at Antioch. When they came to the king, he was very glad at their arrival. Then men from the city gathered within the city, 120,000 of them, and they wanted to kill the king. But the king fled into the palace, and those from the city seized the streets of the city, and they began to fight. So the king summoned the Jews for help, and they all rallied around him and dispersed throughout the city. On that day they killed about 100,000 men. They set the city on fire, took many spoils on that day, and rescued the king. When the men of the city realized the Jews had gained control of the city at will, they lost their courage and called out the king with his request: "Restore the peace and make the Jews quit fighting us and the city." So they threw down their weapons and made peace. Then the Jews were honored before the king and before all those in his kingdom. After this they returned to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus King Demetrius ruled on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was peaceful before him. But he broke his word about everything he promised Jonathan. Thus he became estranged from him and did not repay Jonathan Excuse me, guys. The favors he had done for him, but greatly afflicted him. Antiochus VI honors Jonathan. Later, Tryphon returned and had with him the young boy Antiochus, who put on the crown and became king. All the troops who had cursed Demetrius gathered around him. They fought against Demetrius, who was put to flight. Tryphon then captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. So Antiochus the younger wrote to Jonathan, saying, I confirm you in the high priesthood, set you over the 4 provinces, and you will be one of the king's friends. He also sent him gold cups to serve him at table, and gave him authority to drink from these, to dress in purple, and to wear a golden buckle. He then established Simon his brother as general from the ladder of Tyre to the boundary of Egypt. So Jonathan departed and journeyed beyond the river in the cities. The entire army of Syria gathered around him as allies. When he went into Ascalon, the people of the city met him and honored him. From there he left for Gaza. But when the inhabitants of Gaza shut him out, he besieged the city, set its surrounding fortifications on fire, and plundered them. Thus the men of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan. He made peace with them, took the sons of their governors as hostage, and dispatched them to Jerusalem. Then he traveled through the country, going as far as Damascus. Jonathan also got word the officers of Demetrius had arrived in Kadesh in Galilee with a sizable army. They intended to oust him from office, so he set out to meet them, but he left his brother Simon in the country. Then Simon positioned himself at Beth-zur, and for many days fought against it and blocked it off. Then the people begged him for peace, and he granted it to them. So he cast them out from there, took possession of the city, and placed a garrison on it. Now Jonathan and his soldiers camped by the lake of Gennesaret, and rose early the next morning, and marched to the plain of Hazor. Then, behold, the foreign army met him in the plain, and set up an ambush against him in the mountains. But they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in the ambush rose up from their places and joined the battle. All Jonathan's men fled. None of them remained except Mattathias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Chalphi, commanders of the armed forces. So Jonathan tore his garments, poured earth on his head, and prayed. Then he turned back to the battle and put the enemy to flight. When Jonathan's men who had run away saw this, they returned and joined him in the pursuit of the enemy as far as Kadesh, and there they set up camp. As many as 3,000 of the foreign army fell that day. Then Jonathan went back to Jerusalem. Chapter 12. Friendship renewed with Rome and Sparta. When Jonathan saw the time was right, he chose envoys and set them in Rome to validate and renew friendship with them. Also he sent letters to Sparta and other localities for the same reasons. So they left for Rome, entered the Senate chamber, and said, Jonathan the high priest and the nation of the Jews sent us here to renew the former friendship and alliance between ourselves. Then the Romans wrote letters to the citizens in every place, so they might send forth the ambassadors to the land of Judah in peace. This is the copy of letters which Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. Jonathan the high priest, the elders of the nations, the priests, and the Jewish people to their brothers, the Spartans, greetings. Sometime earlier, letters were sent to Onias, the high priest by Arius, who ruled over you, that you are our brothers, as the attached copy indicates. Onias received the envoy with honor, and he accepted the letters, which plainly showed the alliance and friendship. Therefore, although we do not need these things, since we have the holy books in our hands, we have decided to send and renew our brotherhood and friendship, so we would not be estranged from you. For significant time has elapsed since you sent word to us. Therefore, at every opportunity, both on feast days and ordinary days, we remember you unceasingly in the sacrifices we offer and in our prayers, as it is right and proper to remember brothers, for we rejoice in your glory. But many troubles and many wars have surrounded us, and the kings around us have fought against us. We did not wish to trouble you and our other allies and friends with these wars, for we had help from heaven assisting us, for we were freed from our enemies, and they were humbled. Therefore we chose Numenius, son of Antiochus, and Antipater, son of Jason, and sent them to Rome to renew our former friendship and alliance with them. We also ordered them to go to you, to greet you, and to give you these letters from us concerning the renewal of our brotherhood. Now then, please send us a reply. This is the copy of the letters they sent to Onius. King Arius of the Spartans, to Onius the high priest, greetings. It has been put in writing regarding both the Spartans and the Jews that they are brothers, and are both of the family of Abraham. So now that we know this, please write us concerning your welfare. Thus we are writing to you that your cattle and possessions are ours, and ours are yours. Therefore we order our ambassadors to report to you accordingly. Campaigns of Jonathan and Simon. Then Jonathan heard the officers of Demetrius had come back with a larger army than before to make war against him. So he marched out of Jerusalem and engaged them in the area around Hamath, giving them no chance to invade his country. So he sent out spies to their encampment. They later returned and told them the army of Demetrius planned to attack the Jews at night. At sunset, Jonathan ordered those with him to stay awake and to be ready with their weapons for a fight during the night. Then he set out an advance guard to surround the camp. When the enemy got word that Jonathan and his soldiers were ready for battle, they were terrified at heart. So they lit fires in their camp and fled. But Jonathan and his men did not know this until it was morning, for they saw the firelight. So Jonathan chased after them, but could not overtake them because they crossed over the Eleutherus river. Then Jonathan turned aside against the Arabs, called Zabadeans, and struck them and took their spoils. He then broke camp and marched to Damascus and throughout all that country. Meanwhile, Simon went out and marched as far as Ashkelon and the fortresses nearby, and turned aside to Joppa and captured it, for he heard they wished to hand over the fortress to the men sent by Demetrius. So he established a garrison there to guard it. When Jonathan returned, he assembled the elders of the people. Together they decided to build fortresses in Judea and to make the walls of Jerusalem even higher and raise a great high wall between the citadel and the city to separate it from the city, so it would be isolated and its garrison could not buy nor sell goods. So they assembled to rebuild the city and part of the wall on the valley to the east that had fallen. Thus he repaired the wall that is called Chephanatha. Simon also built Adida in the Shephelah. They fortified it and set up bolted gates. Jonathan captured, troops killed. Then Tryphon sought to rule Asia, to wear the crown, and to stretch forth his hand against King Antiochus. He also took precautions lest Jonathan would not permit it, but wage war against him. So seeking to capture and destroy him, he marched forth to Bethshan. Then Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 soldiers chosen for battle. And he came to Bethshan, where Tryphon saw that he came with a large army. He was afraid to stretch forth his hand against him. So he received him honorably and met him with all his friends. He gave gifts to Jonathan and ordered his friends and his troops to obey him as himself. Then he said to Jonathan, "Why have you troubled all these men? We are not at war. Now send them home, but choose a few soldiers for yourself to be with you. Then come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it over to you along with the rest of the fortresses and the remaining troops and officers. Then I will turn around and go home, for that is why I came here." So Jonathan believed Tryphon and did as he said, and sent away his troops, who departed for the region of Judah. But he kept 3,000 soldiers with him, 2,000 of which he left in Galilee, and 1,000 who went with him. But when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the men of the city shut the gates and captured him, and they slew with the sword all who entered with him. Then Tryphon sent soldiers and cavalry into Galilee and the great plain to kill all Jonathan's men. But when the soldiers learned that Jonathan and those who and those with him had been captured and killed, they encouraged each other to keep marching in close formation, ready for attack. But when the pursuers saw them ready to fight for their lives, they retreated. So they came safely to the land of Judah and cried out for Jonathan and his men. They were exceedingly afraid, and all Israel mourned greatly. Then all the nations surrounding them tried to defeat them, saying, there is none to lead them or to help them. Now then, let us wage war against them and erase them from memory. Excuse me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Alright, guys. Let me grab my Bible, and we'll go over all the footnotes. Chapter 10, verse 84. Dagon, literally a fish, was one of the gods of the Philistines, a seafaring people, and was represented by a man's torso with the tail of a fish. Dagon had two temples mentioned in the Bible, one at Gaza in the book of Judges chapter 16 verses 21 through 30, and one at Ashdod in the book of 1 Kings chapter 5, 1 Kingdoms chapter 5 verse 5, and also in 1 Chronicles chapter 10 verse 10. Verses 88 and 89. Alexander recognized Jonathan as equal, a far cry from the Jews' rebel days in the Gophna Hills. Chapter 11, verses 67 through 74. The foreign army was from a conglomerate of tribes trying to take advantage of the struggle Jonathan faced against Demetrius. I guess that's actually all the footnotes for today. So, with that being said, I love you. God loves you infinitely more. Love people today, guys. Give alms. Do what's right. Repent. I have an Instagram as well, where I do, of course, much shorter messages than the Bible readings, but it's of the same name, John Shares the Bible. If you're interested, I love you. God loves you infinitely more. Thank you so much for being here, and God bless you all.